Okay, we're live on, I think, Instagram and YouTube. We're going to get live here on TikTok here in a second. So just a few seconds here and we will get started, everybody. Okay, all right. Well, welcome everybody to our Friday live show. This runs every Friday at 7 Central. I'm your host, Sean Lawyer. I'm a former soldier turned spiritual seeker. And really, what I'm all about is trying to have really good, open minded conversations with as many people as I can in the realm of philosophy and self help and religion and spirituality. And I think if we can have these conversations, we can all make the world a better place. And every week we have a different co-host that's a guest. I'm honored to introduce you to Roger Butts. He's a Unitarian Universalist minister and the author of the book titled Seeds of Devotion, Weekly Contemplations on Faith. And throughout this live stream, we're actually going to have that book linked, so check it out. And I don't really like to read someone else's bio word for word, so I'm going to turn it over to Roger so he can tell us what he's all about.
Oh, thanks. It's so nice to be with you, John. Thanks for your hospitality. So my name is Roger Butts. I grew up in the Midwest. I grew up in a small town in Illinois. And I had parents and uncles and aunts who were mostly in North Carolina and who took religion very seriously. So they were either teachers or preachers, and so this was an important part of my development and life. And so when I went off to college in the mountains of North Carolina, I really went on a journey to find what was I going to be. And I really like the Quakers. I still do. I really like the Episcopalians. I still do. But over the course of my young adult years, I landed on the Unitarian Universalist, very interesting, small denomination with lots of different belief systems within it, but a real sense of the importance of the human dignity of all folks. So I've been ordained in that tradition for like 22 years. And right now, after serving a couple of congregations in Iowa and Colorado, I am now a chaplain. I'm a hospital chaplain and a hospice chaplain. And I really love that work. And if you read my book, Seeds of Devotion, you'll see how much I love chaplaincy. It's really significant for me. So that's a little bit about me. I'm married to a pastor as well. Her name is Marta, and she is in the United Church of Christ, which is a progressive Protestant denomination that also came out of New England primarily. I like the Unitarians did. So that's a little bit about me. I have 2 black labs and 3 young adult kids, 17, 20, and 21. So it's fun. I played tennis outside today in Colorado, and it was like 100 degrees. So God only knows what's going to come out of my mouth in the next little bit. But I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and thank you for sharing the journey. I think it's so interesting to hear about like how people ended up where they are. And I'm also a fan of black lab. I grew up with labs my whole life, so I love that you have 2 black labs. And Stacy and I actually have a almost 13-year-old yellow lab, and he was actually in Afghanistan with us when we were there. So he was a working dog, so retired. So yeah,
Beautiful.
he's a sweet old man. So
He had a project. He was a helper dog.
yeah, he was
project.
a cell phone detection dog. He found cell phones. So
Every dog needs a project.
every dog does need a project. It's amazing what they can do, and it's amazing how much they can uplift people.
Oh,
It was nice. It was a breath of fresh air to have a dog around our unit in Afghanistan. So
I bet.
yeah, it was definitely a blessing.
Yeah,
Um,
dogs are really special. At the hospice where I work in Fort Collins, every like once a month or once every 2 months, um, therapeutic miniature donkeys come and hang out with the residents. It's very
that's
sweet.
amazing.
It's very sweet.
Well, what beautiful work you do with helping people that are in times of crisis and times of pain and suffering, and helping them through that process, and showing them there's them and their families, there's something beyond all of that. I think it's really powerful. And that's a tough calling. I've having worked with chaplains in the military some, being a chaplain is definitely, it's an interesting calling for people to have. So it's really interesting to be able to talk to someone about it face to face here.
Yeah, and I tell people I sometimes get asked to come down to like Amarillo or other places to give a sermon, and I tell people that I get paid to ask the question, how is it with your soul? And then I get paid to keep my mouth shut. So it's perfect.
No, it's like that. People think that I think people see ministers because they're talking a lot when people see them, right? But then there's this whole other side of spiritual teachers and ministers and these ordained people, and there's a lot of listening involved, and it's so important to find that line and to be there, because people definitely need to be able to share parts of themselves with people that can hear them, like really hear them. It's a beautiful thing to be heard in this world.
It's crucial, and the role of the chaplain is to remind people of the resources that are inside of them that are useful as they confront whatever grief or loss or suffering that they're in the midst of. That everybody has experience with these things, and we all have these resources that we can draw on, and to be heard in moments like that is to enable the person who is suffering to remember who they are, what they're about, the strength that resides in them, the grace that resides in them, the resilience, and to help them discover in their own spirit the resources and tools that they need to make meaning and purpose of whatever it is they're going through.
Absolutely. Grace and resilience, those are two amazing things. And I've really been looking forward to this episode specifically because you're a universalist. I call myself an omnist, but I also call myself a universalist. So it's very similar.
Yeah.
And I think it's so refreshing to be able to kind of take a deep breath and say, what do we have in common? And then say, what do we have that's not in common? And figure out new questions to ask and find new answers to the same questions that we've asked in the past based on new perspectives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I suspect we have plenty in common and some things that probably aren't in common. And that's the beauty of it. We're in a place right now in our country, maybe in the world, where we're really being invited to build these kinds of bridges, have this kind of curiosity about the other, so that we can all sort of build a world that's more peaceful and just and loving and kind.
I deeply believe that if we can wake up each day curious, you just said curiosity. I think that's going to lead to a much better day for us. It's going to lead to a much better day for probably other people. And I have this friend, we served in Afghanistan together, and he's from Arkansas, and he's an evangelical Christian, fairly conservative, but I love that he and I could always sit down and have a nice conversation, and we didn't hate each other or get mad at each other.
Want to kill each other.
Yeah, exactly. Which is really what it comes to, right? When you have a lack of curiosity, that leads to things like killing each other. When you're not curious, when you're closed mind, when you're closed off, when you're not open. I love talking about being open to the universe, or Christ consciousness, or whatever we may call it.
Right.
I usually ask this question of each guest, but I'm interested. What what is spirituality to you? Like when someone asks you that, how would you describe it?
Well, for me, spirituality is, you know, I, d- I don't, I don't go, I don't, I never answer the question like I'm spiritual but not religious. I'm religious. Like I've chosen to be part of a denomination and I go to church on Sundays and I would go to church on Sundays no matter what. So there's something about religion that I really love. I love standing up, kneeling down. I love singing, even though I suck at it. All of it is great, right? I love prayers of the people, and and I would do that no matter what. So there's a part of me that really just likes going to church. Um, but as many spiritual teachers have commented, church is a place almost designed to discourage you from encountering God, And so spirituality is the encounter, the firsthand encounter of that which is beyond us, within us, bigger than us, um, that sustains us, and at its core points to a goodness at the heart of all things. Now, this is what I have come to. I've done about 1,000 funerals in my life. I don't know how many, but a bunch. At the heart of all creation, there is a purposeful goodness from which we come and which we live our fullest, to which we shall at last return. And this points to spirituality. Spirituality is that firsthand encounter with that great mystery that is beyond names, beyond labels, that connects us to others and to that which is ultimately trustworthy.
Yeah, that's a yeah. I'm definitely gonna have to replay that because I
That's a
definitely
lot of words. Oh, yeah,
no. I mean replay that in like and take it in again because it's so true. There's a lot of truth there, and ultimately what you're describing there, which I see as truth, is what I think where people find their own truth if they follow that path that you're just laying out, right?
yeah.
And it's that description you have of it's the without and that stuff that's something deeper that's beyond us. It's that something deeper that's within us. I love that
Right.
you put it in
Both ends.
both ways, yeah, because it's so true, and I feel refreshed that you acknowledge, and I agree with this that church itself is this beautiful thing, and community is this beautiful thing,
It can be.
but really the individual person is where the church is. It's where that's where the real connection to the divine occurs.
Right. And, the beautiful part is that we get to do it communally, right? And
Yeah,
so there's also a part of religion that invites us into community. Spiritual people who say, well, I'm spiritual but not religious. I always want to say to them, like, what's your issue with community, dude? What's
yeah,
really going on here? I don't. Obviously, it's like, I wouldn't be offensive to somebody. But that's always the question in my brain. Like, spirituality can become so individualized
yeah.
and personalized that we forget that we have an obligation to the community and to the common good. Religion, especially, I live in sort of Christian, Hebrew Bible, humanism,
Right.
those worlds. They remind us those scriptures remind us that we have an obligation to something beyond ourselves, and that we're our brothers and sisters keepers. That's what I really like about religion, as opposed to spirituality, is that religion reminds us that we are our brother's keepers.
Yeah, what a great conversation. I really resonate with that as well. because I see all these people that they come across spirituality, they're searching for something, and I find a lot of them had some possible painful touch points with Judeo-Christianity, in our
Exactly.
society and culture, right? And that creates this barrier that is often created at a young age or at a sensitive time of someone's life. So it's this very present thing,
Yep.
or sometimes it could be a subtle thing that they don't even know exists. And
Yeah, and I want to say very clearly, John, that if somebody has experienced religious trauma, if somebody has experienced religion that is like teaching you to hate those people and like only us are going to heaven and all that stuff, like, everybody has it's a very smart move to divorce yourself from that kind of toxicity.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm talking about. Like,
no, absolutely. And I didn't take it that way at all.
Yeah.
I
just want to be super clear.
No, I agree. And I was raised Southern Baptist in a Southern
yeah.
Baptist convention, so I have some spiritual trauma that I carry with me, some religious trauma.
So that's serious business, man. My
Oh,
uncle,
that's very, very serious.
I have an uncle who was a Southern Baptist minister who like was a very small church person. And then I have an uncle who is very famous and has been on Oprah and all of that and is a Southern Baptist minister. So I know that tradition. I did not choose to stay in that tradition.
No, I get that. No, I left it when I grew up. I left the church. My parents were pretty progressive, though. They taught me. They were in it because their parents were in it.
Right.
So,
Right.
but they raised me very liberal, to be a liberal thinker, to be an open-minded person.
I love that.
Thank God.
I love that.
I love that. I really like that you talk about the fact that religion is community, and I think people forget when they're trying to walk a spiritual path. Sometimes it's about like you start to read books and you start to gain knowledge and you start to figure out ways to transcend and connect with the divine or connect with yourself with a capital S, whatever we want to call it, right? And in doing so, I think sometimes we forget that we're human. Yes. That we're always going to be human until this ride is over, and that because we're human, we require human things, and that's community, that's connection. Right. I think people forget that sometimes.
Absolutely, and I'm going to be in Boulder, Colorado, a week from this Sunday. I'm preaching on Mary Magdalene and the Gospel of Mary. In that gospel, Jesus says, look, the beware of those who say the kingdom is over there, the kingdom is he's like, it's in every person. And the project, the goal, the outcome that we're looking for, he doesn't say it like that because that sounds very corporate, but you get my idea, right?
Sure.
The idea that he wants to implant on these disciples is we are becoming fully human. We are becoming fully human. And I find so much inspiration in that. The Jesus Project is for each of us to be fully human, which is what you're talking about. Connected, grounded, relational, compassionate, curious, alive. So I can't wait to preach on that.
No, that sounds like a really compelling sermon.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah, and I always, when I think about Jesus, and like Jesus became fully human, and there's something really compelling about that aspect of it. And I always see Jesus very, very similar to Buddha when I think about them in my brain.
Yes.
However my brain's wired, it always fires those two together.
Yes, I have a chap, a little. So my book is like a little short story, a prayer, and reflection questions. and there are about 52 of them, which is why it's like weekly contemplations on faith. But I have a little story where Jesus, Buddha, the goddess, I think it's just the three of them, are hanging out talking, and they're like, what did we do wrong? Like, how did we fail in communicating what we were trying to do with these humans? And it's kind of fun. And it ends with Carl Sandburg coming, because presumably they're all in heaven, right, talking about
Sure.
this stuff. But um, Carl Sandburg and Rumi come by, and Carl Sandburg ends up reading a poem that he wrote, and the poem is called Happiness. And this poem called Happiness by Carl Sandburg is like, I went to the religious leaders and I asked them what they were, what is happiness? And I went to the big bankers and said, what is happiness? And I went to the professors and said, what is happiness? And he says, they all looked at me like I was fooling. And then I was driving past the Des Plaines River, and I saw a group of Hungarians with their women and their beer. And that's the whole poem. Right? That's it. Like those Hungarians knew more than all the learned people because they were being fully human.
Yeah. And this is a subject that I don't think we talk about a lot. I haven't talked a lot about on this channel, but it's, yeah, when you're being fully human and you're embracing it and you're embracing who you are within that, there is a certain joy that comes out of it. And I mean, whether you're looking at Jesus Christ or Buddha or the teachings of the yogis or the indigenous traditions from all around the world,
Joy.
you know,
Joy.
we got to have fun. We got to be
Joy
joyful.
is the joy is the joy is the outcome. Joy is the consequence. That doesn't mean falsely like rah rah all the
Yeah.
time, but um, but this joy. So when this minister that I love, Carl Scoville, who was at King's Chapel in Boston, when he writes, the great surmise says simply this: at the heart of all creation there is a purposeful goodness, from which we come and which we live our fullest, to which we shall at last return. He goes on and says, this is the ultimate reality. This goodness is the ultimate reality. And he says, out of that emerges joy. And he ends that paragraph with, too much of a good thing, said Mae West, is wonderful. Right?
Yes.
So, joy.
Yeah, absolutely. I that's a great quote, by the way.
Isn't
And that
that
leads
wonderful?
me. I spend a lot of time thinking and talking about higher purpose or dharma, and so you're kind of hitting on that a little bit here. Like, I mean, I kind of believe that each of us has our own unique dharma or higher purpose in this kind of world that we're in. What's your take on dharma or higher purpose?
Well, you tell me first.
I believe, like I said, I think that we have to find it first. And so to find it, we have to think about what lights me up, what fills me up. What can I not wait to do tomorrow when I go to bed tonight? And then once we know it, then ask ourselves, am I living that in alignment with my mind, body, and soul as I go throughout this really crazy thing that we call humanity in the world?
And who can I hang out with that will help me
Yes.
light that fuse or light
Yeah.
that fire or whatever, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Finding those people that will walk the journey with you.
Walk the journey. And that goes back to community, and it goes back to amazing things happen when we surround ourselves with people who match the alignment of the reality we want to essentially manifest or put in place every day, right? Like, if we surround ourselves with people that aren't in our vibe or our wavelength or our flow or whatever you want to call it, then we're going to be out of sync.
That's right. I would recommend the epilogue of Dorothy Day, who was a Catholic social justice activist, peace activist, fed the hungry, um, housed the hungry. Um, the epilogue of her book, The Long Loneliness, in it, she talks about how she and her friend Peter Marin, um, they were like, we got to feed these people. Jesus tells us to feed these people, and she talks about how once she started feeding people, bread appeared. Once she started housing people, rooms appeared. She said love was at the center of our work. Love was at the center of our work. And what we needed started emerging because they had aligned, as you said, they aligned themselves with their purpose and their vision based on their deep faith, and started bringing around people who would help them out. And all of a sudden, they have a farm out in Long Island or upstate New York or somewhere. They're doing all this work in the Lower East Side of Manhattan, and all of a sudden they've got a farm, and all of a sudden other people are coming to learn how they're doing this. And these houses of hospitality emerge in DC and Baltimore and Philadelphia and Chicago. It just spreads and spreads and spreads because, as you would say, she found her purpose, her dharma, whatever.
Yeah. And that's so true. Like when we're out seeking to put something out into the world, into the universe, that stuff starts to come back to us, and it's amazing what we can create in our own reality when we put ourselves, our whole self, into something. The passion,
Now, how did you end up in war?
That's a good question. It started kind of altruistic, I guess. I watched Lawrence of Arabia. I'm like, I want to do that. I want to be Lawrence. And
Nice.
and then I watched Al Qaeda. I grew up in the 80s and
You could
90s.
watch The Sound of Music. You could be a nanny right now. But
I know. I did. I mean, I like The Sound of Music. It was good. But and then I watched
Mary
the development.
Poppins. I'm thinking of Mary Poppins.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yes. Continue.
Yeah, the development of Al Qaeda and all this terrorism, and I wanted to stop. I wanted to understand it, and then I wanted to stop it. I wanted to figure out a way to prevent it. So it was kind of an altruistic youth. I wanted to make the world a better place, and I was passionate about it. And it's one of those be careful what you wish for situations. I read Jack Ryan novels and Tom Clancy, and I show up to I enlist to be a counterintelligence special agent in the Army. That was the year before 9/11. So I go through my training. I get to my unit. This is 6 months before 9/11. I show up, and the first sergeant's like, okay, you're going to go over to one of these generic counterintelligence platoons where they just kind of sit around all day and stare at each other. He takes me to go see the commander, and the commander says, well, why'd you join the Army? And I said, well, I joined the Army to do counterterrorism. And the commander's like, well, this so happens we have a real world office right here in Georgia, at Fort Gordon, Georgia, that does counterterrorism work. This is before 9/11. And so he told the first sergeant, he's like, put Lawyer there, put John Lawyer there. And so I got put in this cell, and I was actually on shift in a top secret facility the morning that 9/11 happened. And I was surrounded by these brilliant men and women that were really good at their jobs. Mm-hmm. They were really kind people most of the time. Mm-hmm. And they trained me and taught me, and I listened and I absorbed it all. And then 9/11 happened, and I realized my whole life had changed. So it was literally one of those be careful what you wish for situations, because I wished to go to war. And that's what happened.
You go off to Afghanistan.
I went to Kuwait, and then I spent 2.5 years there. I spent 18 months in Baghdad, and I spent about 6.5 years consecutively in Afghanistan. So I would spend about, as a soldier and then later as a civilian, doing kind of the same thing. But I kind of like, it was like law of attraction.
You brought that.
I made it happen. Yeah. And
you manifested it.
Yeah, and so during those years, I wasn't spiritual. I didn't have time for God. If that it sounds bad, but for me, I was agnostic, and at that point, I forgot about God. And I wanted to succeed. I wanted to my mission was usually to protect people, to put stuff together and figure things out in order to protect people. And the longer I was in this military industrial complex machine, the darker I realized it was. And so, and I was working 100 hours a week, and
Whoa.
it burns you up.
Whoa.
This machine chews the enemy up. It chews you up and your brothers and sisters in arms. The civilians that are caught in the middle. You realize the enemy is not really the enemy anymore. That they're just trying to live their life, and that we're not righteous. Which I wish that could probably that should be a bumper sticker, right? We're not righteous. So that's kind of the cliff notes of that. It's to answer your question.
Mm. And what do you think was what do you think caused you then to go on this spiritual journey?
I think when someone is exposed to such extreme darkness, because I mean, I had everything from PTSD to obsessive compulsive, like hypervigilance, depression.
Mm-hmm.
I was completely broken, and I'd seen this darkness, and I wasn't just in the darkness. I had seen it. I had been a part of it. So I've seen evil. I've done evil. And you start to have this. I had this really big thing where I had to forgive myself and couldn't. I couldn't forgive others for what they had done to me,
Yes.
whether individual people or the army or the U.S. government. And so I had all this pain.
Yes.
And I think when someone's exposed to that much darkness,
Yes.
the beautiful thing about it, the truly powerful thing about it is that you can't help but hopefully and eventually, and for me, see light. And there's great contrast. Darkness provides great contrast to the light. And I was so lost for so long, and it was such a hard journey
Yes.
that I surrendered. Like, finally one day I was like, I'm done. I don't care anymore about what happened yesterday. I don't care what's happening tomorrow. I still wanted to live, but I didn't care about anything. And so I just completely surrendered to the universe. It wasn't spiritual. It was. I didn't see it as spiritual at the time. And I lived that way, kind of like this like agnostic, common sense, logical surrender that was spiritual, but I didn't realize it. And that led me to eventually having like this kind of lightning bolt spiritual moment about two or 3 or 4 years after that.
You had to go like you can't imagine as a hospice chaplain and a hospital chaplain how many times I read Psalm 23 to people because they want me to read it to them. And it's beautiful, right? But we hear it so much that when the line says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear nothing. Like we're so numbed out because we hear that line so much, at least I do, that it takes hearing a story like yours, and experiencing some of the things that I experience in the hospital or at hospice to be like, no, like walking through the shadow of the valley of death, or the valley of the shadow of death, whatever it is, like that's serious business. That's like serious stuff. And like it is fearful.
Yeah.
It is scary. Like I will fear nothing is like this bold proclamation of like my faith is going to carry me through it. But most of the people I talk to are really scared. Even if they have like such a strong faith that they know they're going to be with God and all of this stuff, they still facing the unknown of dying or the unknown of a trauma in the hospital. scares the bejesus out of them.
That's why it's so amazing when I think about what people like you do, because you're surrounded by this fear, not you, but the people that are around you, this fear and this trauma and this sadness, and for you to be able to maintain your center throughout that, it's definitely like, and I don't mean this in like a violent way, but it's the heart of a warrior in like the most altruistic sense. I think it's like in a very spiritual, kind of holy sort of way, to be able to maintain that light for people.
Mm-hmm. And the only way it happens, the only way it happens is you have to do the work, right? So,
Always.
You just got to do the work. And, the chaplains who don't do the work are not going to last very long, right? It just becomes too overwhelming. Or they'll turn to addiction or narcissism or some other defense mechanism.
Right.
But mine tends to be dark humor, don't judge.
Sure.
So it's powerful to hear your story. It's amazing to think about the resilience and courage that it took to try to find a spirituality in the midst of all of that. And so I just want to applaud you.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's good to be able to talk about it on the other side,
Yes, I bet.
Yeah. And I really like that you say that chaplains like yourself and people who are surrounded by this, they have to work on themselves and they have to take care of themselves. And that it's not just always this divine IV to God or this divine connection to God, right? It's or the divine, it's this very human thing that we do.
Exactly.
That does connect us to the beyond, or to ourselves, however we do look at it. But it's this human thing of putting the work in.
Gotta put the work in.
That's I think our viewers could take a lot from that. The fact that we have to come every day prepared to do the work, and also have the grace for ourselves to know that some days that we won't have it in us to do the work.
That's right. And to be compassionate with ourselves. The important thing, I think, is to know what role you're playing, what you're offering, why you're there, and to recognize ahead of time, like, what are the things that are going to make me want to run out of the room screaming or crying or avoid this, right? What's going to shut me down? Because the more we become self-aware, the better chance we'll have to not get in our own way. Can I read you something from my book?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wrote a little prayer. So it's based on I wrote a prayer based on it's a reflection prayer thing. But I tell a story about one Friday night about this time. I got a call when I was working in the hospital as a chaplain, and the nurse said, there's this little old lady and she's very frail and she's going to go to hospice in a couple of days. But we wonder if you could come up and spend some time with her. And so I was like, of course. Her family had left, and she was in there saying the Lord's Prayer. She was confused. She was close to death, but she was saying the Lord's Prayer. And so I joined her. And at the end, she notices me. She wakes up just enough to notice me. And she looks at me and she says, oh, goodness, I seem to have forgotten the end, but thank you, God, for everything. Right? There's a beautiful ending to that prayer. Right? And then she went back to La La Land, So this is the prayer I wrote after telling that story. and it's about chaplaincy. First, walk gently. You're entering into the great mystery. Sorrow, regret, anger, grief, relief. You never know what you'll find. You may as well walk gently into that room, which will likely be dark and quiet. Second, talk gently. The dead dream, and survivors do too. They're in a fog or out to sea or in the deep woods. Pick your image, but talk gently. That mystery will one day be you and yours. Third, act gently. Your gentleness will invite whatever needs to happen to happen. If at all possible, make it so the wife, husband, mother, child hardly knows you're there. Listen gently. Listen with your eyes and your ears and mostly your heart. The stories will come. Be there to hear them. Stories remind the wife that she is still alive and is alone and not alone all at once. Be the Spirit or Jesus or Muhammad or the Buddha. Pick your guide and be that person. Mary, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, it matters not. Of course, you are the best option. So be you in all of your quirky, unexpected, beautiful, flawed, perfect existence.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing that. It's that has layers. It's got a lot of layers to it.
The work of chaplaincy, you just never know what you're going to encounter. And so you just have to have a lot of courage and a lot of curiosity. And if you have those two things, compassion and connection will follow.
Yeah. And you've talked about awareness too, is like approaching when we approach ourself with awareness, and then we approach like the world around us with awareness, and naturally really good things tend to happen to us.
Yeah, so there was a French philosopher named Emmanuel Levinas who said that when we look upon the face of the other, when we look at another person's face, before we can make any labels, before we can make any categories, before we can make any kind of prejudgment, that in our bones, God sends the message that this is the face of the divine, that the other person is the face of the divine, and that the first principle is do no harm.
Yeah.
So when you look at the face of the other, you're looking at the face of God.
Yes. Yeah, and in some interpretations of mystical Christianity or other mysticisms, it's you're also looking at yourself.
Yes, yes.
You know? So
And
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you're looking at yourself too, right? I mean,
Yeah, it's a good.
we're all
It's a
still connected.
yeah, and that goes back to the we've talked about it on this channel before, like you always see the reflection and mirror metaphor come into spirituality and religion.
Yes,
I know you're a fan of Rumi, so I know
I
he
do
uses
like
it
Rumi.
quite a bit.
I like Rumi. I took the title of my book from a Rumi quote.
Yeah, it's I really like the Sufis. I think there's I like all the mystics from all the traditions. They're always down to talk about open-minded, and you can almost tell,
Yes,
like in these hundreds of years ago, sometimes thousands, but hundreds of years ago, here are these religious figures, these scholars, and these theologians talking about. And you can almost tell they want to write even more open-minded, but they can't because they're confined by the limits of the time that they're writing in.
yeah. Somebody's going
It's
to get them in trouble.
Yes, they have to be kind of careful about what they say. But you can read between the lines some very, really interesting things, which is interesting to read mysticism that way because that's how they kind of convey the mysticism that they write. So
Oh, such a mystery, It's just,
yeah,
you're just approximating your little finger pointing at the moon. It's just the best. It's the best attempt you can come up with.
yeah,
But that's the beauty of, like, what I sensed from you, John, is that, like, you are hungry and craving spiritual depth and spiritual connection and you're going to read like Julian of Norwich and Teresa of Avila and Rumi and the Buddha and everybody who loves the Buddha. You're going to read these people because you're just wanting to have this outlook that includes everyone and all of nature in this crazy mystical unity that is so hard to explain, but people love, trying to do it.
Yeah, that goes back to that curiosity we kind of started off with. Is that, and in part for me, because I feel like we talked about purpose earlier and higher purpose. I feel like my purpose is to have these kind of conversations with people so that I can understand them and I can have better conversations with people from all walks of life. And then if someone comes in and says, "Well, I don't know what to believe," you can present that person. I can present that person with options that work for them because,
Right.
what Jesus said may not resonate. What Buddha said may resonate. What the yogi said may resonate better. Who knows, right? Like,
Exactly.
it could be an indigenous faith that has really base wisdom from a long time ago that speaks to them. We never know where that spark is going to come from.
We don't, and we just have to encourage people to keep searching. I think I told you, maybe it was before we began recording, but I've been down to Amarillo twice. Amarilla, I don't know how you say it, but I've been there twice in the last 6 months, preaching at this small little UU fellowship there, and the last time I went was like maybe 3 weeks ago or something. And I talked about gender fluidity, which is like really big right now. And I work with somebody who considers themselves gender fluid, and they wrote a little testimonial about what that means to them. And then there's all this kind of relational fluidity right now, like polyamory and all of these different ways of being in the world. And so I talked about gender fluidity, relational fluidity, and finally I landed on the point of the sermon, which was spiritual fluidity. I really believe that the future of faith is a kind of openness, a fluidity, where a person can be both Christian and pagan, Buddhist and whatever, Jewish, like it to me, that's a very exciting prospect.
I agree with you that I think this is becoming an increasingly accepted thing to have interfaith, interspiritual dialogue where we can say, how are we similar? How are we different?
Yep.
And figure out on the differences, does that really matter? Because usually it doesn't.
Right.
Right.
Well, not so much that we should, we should be pretty tolerant unless somebody trying to erase another culture or something.
No, and that's what I'm all about. Like, I'll talk to anybody as long as they're not a jerk. And
I can tell. I love it.
Open.
I love your podcast, man. I love this.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
So I'm so grateful to be able to talk with you. I'm gonna get on with my evening now, and I've got to go back out and do a few things while the sun is still here.
Yeah, for sure.
But I'm so grateful for the opportunity to.
Yeah, it's been a really good and open conversation, and we've had the link to your book scrolling during this, and we'll also include that in the main show notes when this permanently gets published after the live. Is there anywhere else you want to direct people to besides your book link?
I do some work in Medium. So if they look for Roger Butts on Medium, I think they can find me. Maybe not as much as I should, but I also write there.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and I encourage the audience to please grab a copy of the book. It's something that can keep you grounded and centered, which is really amazing, and it's soul expanding, which I think is probably the best compliment we could pay a book. And appreciate everybody watching. We'll be here next Friday at 7 Central, same time. Our co-host is going to be Gabrielle Pimstone. She's an energy master, so that should end up being a great conversation about breaking free of stagnation and fear.
Yes.
And Roger, if you'll just stick around for 1 second, we're going to go take us off live here, and then we'll say our goodbyes.
Hold on 1 second. I want to give your your listeners a blessing. Can I do that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
From the
That would
book.
be lovely.
Yeah, this is from the book. This is a blessing for you and your beloved and your dog and your listeners.
Thank you.
May life surprise you today. May a sense of grace come out of nowhere in the middle of your daily tasks. May a sense of peace find you in the unlikeliest of places. May a sense of courage and renewal find you, and may God's love surround you. And may a gentleness, a returning quietness, and a restoring stillness be with you now and always. A restorative wholeness is yours to claim and embrace. And may faith, hope, and love be your constant companions. God bless your day.
And yours as well, Roger. Thank you so much. And I'm going to end the stream here. We're going to go